Hey everybody, welcome back to another live stream from Synapse Care Solutions. We are wrapping up our month-long series on pain, stress, and the neonatal brain. This week we have an amazing presentation from Dr. Paige Church. She is a neonatologist and developmental pediatrician, and she has coined a term of the phenotype of prematurity. And you're probably wondering, phenotype, isn't that kind of more about the physical? And she's going to explain all about what she means about a behavior phenotype of the premature infant. This presentation was from our one conference in 2019. It was in San Diego, and Dr. Church couldn't be with us, and she was so gracious to do the presentation online. I know you're going to love this review of the literature around long-term outcomes of our preemies. She is so passionate about helping us to understand the connection between the NICU and long-term outcomes. She wants us to go beyond just those first few years of follow-up. So I know that this doesn't exactly fit with pain and stress, but what we've learned from the other presentations is that pain and stress can actually alter the way the brain develops. We call that dysmaturation. In this presentation, she's going to outline for you beautifully those kind of subtle, minor, but not so minor problems that arise for our preemies later in life. If you want to get some resources, the slides and other exclusive presentations that we're not putting here on our YouTube channel, go ahead and scan the QR code right on this screen or click the link in the show notes below. If you haven't already, do me a favor. Click the like and subscribe button. It helps us out a lot and tells YouTube to send you more content like this, and it helps us to provide more free content for you. So anyways, without further ado, please enjoy this presentation from the 2019 One Conference with Dr. Paige Church.
I met Dr. Paige Church many years ago, and I knew instantly when I met her I needed to learn more from her and glean as much knowledge as I could from her. She's a tiny little woman with a powerful passion for both neonates and follow-up care. Let me read you the official bio sketch. Dr. Church received her medical degree at the University of Vermont College of Medicine. She completed pediatric training at the University of Chicago Children's Hospital and went on to complete dual training in neonatology and developmental behavioral pediatrics at Tufts New England Medical Center. I will tell you that when I met her, she was one of only, I think, 6 in the country who held that dual board certification. She is board certified through the American Board of Pediatrics and Neonatology and Developmental Behavioral Pediatrics. So please enjoy her presentation, and perhaps one of these days we'll get her here in person. Enjoy.
Welcome, Paige.
Hi, thank you. So what I was asked to speak with you about today is something called the behavioral phenotype of prematurity, something I refer to as a perfect storm because we think minor morbidities aren't such a big deal. Our objectives today are we're going to review the behavioral phenotype of prematurity. We'll review the etiology of the phenotype. And also what I really want to also discuss is the gaps that I think exist in the community and in the school systems, as well as in neonatal follow-up, that are making this course for these children a little bit more challenging. So the definition of follow-through, I went looking for this to get a sense of what follow-up, as we were looking at our follow-up, what is it supposed to do? And I liked this, the continuing of an action or a task to its conclusion. But in this idea that we're supposed to carry something through to the end. But I worry to date that neonatal follow-up is a bit like the bridge that's here. We start off really strong in the NICU, and we're very pretty and nice to look at. But then somewhere along neonatal follow-up, it drops off. And while the bridge looks strong and stable, families still need to get to the other side, and I would argue there is no system in place to really carry them to do that. Next slide, please. So traditionally, after children leave the NICU, the outcomes that we follow are the ones that are listed there, the ones that have traditionally been defined as being characterized by having some sort of an impairment, and those would include cerebral palsy, vision impairment, hearing impairment, and cognitive impairment. Those are all associated with some degree of a functional impact or a disability. In terms of outcomes, depending on the gestation you look at and the specific outcome, they can range between about 6 and 25%. But more importantly, 50 to 70% of the children born very preterm are going to have difficulty with school. And the proposed factor is they may not have any of those major morbidities or those significant impairments In fact, they may have minor morbidities. And traditionally in neonatal follow-up, we called them minor because we thought they weren't really that disabling, so they shouldn't be that big of a deal. What these include are challenges with language comprehension and expression, so both how you speak and how you understand non-spoken communication, so a sense of someone's gestures, if they're looking at you, not looking at you, learning, particularly around spatial relationships, impulse control and busy behavior. That's what I've been watching this morning in my clinic here. It's like an ant farm. The children were all over the place. Organizational abilities. So if I give a child a series of tasks in an order, for example, before you put a circle around the X, put your pencil on the box, they can do the tasks, but they often get the series of steps mixed up and in the wrong order. That may not matter now. Very quickly, when you take on more significant functional tasks like baking or anything, when you don't have the order right, you may not get the end result that you wish for. Autism spectrum disorder. Interestingly, this is not being followed by any of the major networks anywhere as a major outcome to follow, so it gets lumped in here. Social immaturity, social challenges, emotional lability. I see this all the time. So our children are late bloomers. They tend to be much more socially immature than their peers. This can result in challenges for them socially, and also they demonstrate a lot of emotional ability. So they might be crying and laughing and crying within the series of about 20 minutes on the playground with very little antecedent events to really have triggered them. Anxiety, particularly separation anxiety, their parents really have become after discharge their social compass, their sort of network of how to navigate the world. And when their parents are gone, they really struggle with that, and so they really resist having their parents taken away from them in the school setting. And then motor coordination. So while many of these children may escape cerebral palsy, simple things like learning to button a coat, learning to ride a bike, learning to play a sport or dance can be exquisitely difficult for these children and is increasingly being recognized as something that actually can be as dysfunctional. So I think most importantly, or one of the most important things that we can talk about with preterm children is how they interact with the world or their social development. And this is from a systematic review from 2015, and they had 23 studies that they looked at, mainly all of them including parent report. They demonstrated that the very preterm child struggled with aspects of their social development. So they had difficulties with theory of mind, so how they understand what someone else is thinking, regulation of their attention and inhibition, a preference to play with adults. We see this all the time. When we go to do school visits here, we look towards the playground and then we look for the teacher, and we often find our preterm children hanging out with them. Later, they may withdraw from their peers and be less interactive, and in general, peer relationships were reported to be more difficult and that they had fewer friends. Taking it a little bit further, this is from Mathieson et al., and this was another systematic review out of McMaster, and what they looked at was the mental health of the preterm. And what they demonstrated with their systematic review was that the preterm's children appear to be struggling with internalizing, so that would be conditions that do not demonstrate any outward behavior. So anxiety would be the classic one. Or externalizing, so ADHD, impulsivity, aggressiveness. They tend to struggle with these much more than their term counterparts. And these struggles appear to persist into the adult years, probably much more so with internalizing challenges than externalizing challenges. So anxiety being a thread that seems to carry them through their lifetime. And the systematic review also mentioned a greater likelihood of autism, and that is another topic that we had briefly discussed but is really nicely addressed here by Alan Leviton's group from ELGAN. So ELGAN was a large study of just about 1,200 preterm babies, and what they found in the early follow-up was that there seemed to be an increased possibility of autism. They then went back for ELGAN 2, and they did formal assessments on all of these children. I think they had a cohort of just under 1,000, maybe 970 children. And from those that screened positive for autism on a screening test as a toddler, they went back and assessed them with the gold standard formal full assessment with an autism diagnostic interview and an autism diagnostic observation schedule, which is the one-on-one test, and that's actually how I spent my morning doing those tests. And what they found was that certainly these children, and the smallest of the children, so the 23 to 24-week children, were scoring or demonstrating a prevalence of autism that was much higher than the average child. So that little hatched line at the very bottom running horizontal on the x-axis, that's the baseline in the population. And you can see that the 23 to 24-week baby is sitting at about 15%. So that's much higher than the average child would be. As these children started to approach the 27, 28-week mark, they start to cross over into what would be considered the range that most of society demonstrates. But it's still quite significant. And with this large cohort, they were able to exclude things that may have made the assessments confounded. So they were able to look at intellectual abilities and compare that against the ADOS scores, and still, with all of that, they were able to determine that there was a significantly higher prevalence of ASD in the children who are born extremely preterm. So what I also think is very important for you to learn about, though, is that the data we've been talking about is really the data that only hits on those that are meeting diagnostic criteria for a disorder. But development is not an all or none phenomenon. Unlike the NICU, where either you have a normal blood pressure or it's abnormal. And we know what we're looking at, and we know the numbers, and we can treat. Development is much more fluid, and it drives a lot of my colleagues crazy when they come from the NICU into the developmental clinic because it's not so clean. We can have children that can demonstrate typical behavior and in the same day demonstrate disordered behavior. And so typical behavior is what we expect most children to demonstrate. And that's what the average child gets up and walks at 12 months. That's what we expect. Problem behavior is behavior that is often environmentally mediated. So an example would be my child. When I come home from work, it's like another child has been dropped off from the carpool. She's irritable. She is hard to discuss anything with. She has really weak attention, can't do her homework, and then you feed her and you put her to bed and she's a different child in the morning. So that's a problem behavior. It's annoying. It's annoying as all hell. But in the morning it's like she's had a lobotomy and she's all better. That isn't a disorder because the environment was able to modify the behavior. So that is an important distinction, whereas disordered behavior, in order to have a disorder, the behavior has to be present in multiple environments. So in school, at home, in Girl Scouts, or wherever the activities are. So for example, attention would be weak and hard to control in all of these settings, not just the school setting. So when we talk about the data for the Prem, and a lot of the data I've showed you, those are children that are demonstrating disordered behavior, and the prevalence is up. There's many more children who demonstrate problem behavior, but it doesn't quite swing into the land of disordered. It doesn't mean it's not a problem, and it doesn't mean that they're successful in school. It can mean that they're really having a hard time still. What's important to know when you talk about these outcomes as they relate to our babies is that a spectrum of outcomes is possible. A child may have many areas that are problematic or even an area that is disordered, and it is very unusual to only have one isolated minor morbidity. So it would be very unusual to just have difficulty with nonverbal communication. Much more common would be nonverbal communication was weak, social skills are weak, and there's some anxiety. So these children tend to have clusters of conditions much more commonly than they have an isolated one minor morbidity. The other thing that we need to understand about these outcomes is that detection requires discrete assessments. These are not things that are going to be picked up on the traditional Bailey that's administered between 18 months and 2. That measures how many tools you have in your toolbox. It gives you a sense of what the children are going to do with those tools later on in life, but it doesn't tell you what they're building with them or how well the tools work. Are they well greased? Do they have all their parts? Have they been properly cared for? None of that is given to you. So this brings me to a point that I think is really important to stress, and this is Dieter Volke's analogy, and I loved it, so I'm using it and quoting him. But he gave a talk last year, and he talked about that all children are going to grow and flower, and all children are beautiful, and that's totally true. But the term child is a bit more like the dandelion, and the preterm child is a bit more like the orchid. Both will give you flowers, but one requires much more attention and nurturing in order to get the flowers to come and for the flowers to stay. Whereas the term child, the dandelion, will grow in much less nurturing environments and still flower. So this idea of this pattern of behaviors is something that we use a lot in developmental peds. And when I say phenotype in neonatology, we generally think of the physical expressions of a genetic condition. So it might be the transverse crease for a child with Down syndrome, or the wide-spaced first and second toe, or the certain way their faces look. But in developmental peds, the phenotype we look for is the behavioral one. So just like there's a physical presentation that comes, in developmental peds, there's a behavioral presentation that comes. And that describes that behavioral, cognitive, motor, and social strengths and challenges that are observed in a population with a common biological disorder. So if I say trisomy 21, you can think of the physical phenotype for that child, but you can also think of the behavioral phenotype for that child. And that child is known to be highly social, has the ability to develop an intellect probably low average, attention might be weak. Likewise, the premature survivors have a phenotype, and instead of it being a genetic condition that is the common biological disorder, for these little guys, it's the dysmaturation or the way that their brains developed in the ICU. This is a great image from our clinic, actually. This is what I think sums up the behavioral phenotype. This is from a 5-year-old who was asked to draw a picture of herself. At 5, we would expect a lot more. You can see the eyes are off the body, the neck is dangling there, the extremities are smushed all over the paper. And when we called the school and said, we've seen so-and-so, do you have any concerns? They thought everything was fine because she wasn't causing trouble in the classroom. She was just sitting quietly. She did later on, they came back to us and they said that they thought she was mildly intellectually disabled and could we diagnose her? And I didn't think that. There was nothing about her that made me feel that way. I think she was a prem who had the behavioral phenotype, and so we did a full neuropsych assessment, and what we found is that she had significant and dramatic learning disabilities, but not intellectual disability. And with different programming in the classroom, she had the capacity to learn just like everybody else. I don't know if you can hear the sound, but this is from a documentary called Bully, and that's Alex, and I'll let you watch it, and then I'll talk about it at the other end.
Please give a big welcome to Alex Libby.
Let me talk to you about bullying and what I went through and what many people go through. Most of the shy kids out there, they're afraid that they'll get picked on if they actually show who they really are. Being me, I learned that it wasn't me, it was them.
Why are you punching me? Why are you stabbing me with it? Oh. Knock your fish hooks off. Fuck. Give it to him hard. Everything that happened to me on that bus happened every day, if not worse. Some of them I grew up with, but they turned on me because they didn't want to get bullied. I really didn't feel anything. I didn't feel the pain that I endured. I didn't feel like I cared about anything anymore. I didn't feel any emotion whatsoever. I felt depression, that was it.
I had a huge fear because Alex has always been the type to act. And I would lay up with my husband at night and I would just cry and say, what if he decides he doesn't want to be here anymore?
So that's an alarming video. Alex was a preterm infant. And when we went to see this at Hot Docs in Toronto, which is a documentary film festival, the director was there, and very quickly, even before his storyline became clear, there were things about the way he moved that we picked up on from our clinic. His gait, which you don't really see there, it's very bouncy. His feet aren't quite hitting the ground. The cadence of his gait is different, and it's very typical of a prem. Alex is manifesting what I worry about a lot of our children manifest and are not so lucky as to have a documentary to show the world. Blessedly, with this documentary, they did intervene on his behalf, and his life has turned around dramatically. But Alex was diagnosed with autism, Alex was diagnosed with depression, and Alex was horribly bullied. And I think the key piece of this is that he was horribly bullied, and he did not have the tools socially to navigate with his peers. and follow-up was long gone. So we've talked about what the behavioral phenotype of prematurity looks like. What's behind it? Remember I mentioned that there was an organic etiology that would be fairly consistent. And what I would argue is that the background for it is this dysmaturation. If you look at these two MRIs, one is a 32-week baby at term, and that's the MRI on the left, and the other MRI is an MRI of a 23-week baby at term. These are from Terry Inder's work. And what you can see is that the MRI of the 32-week baby's brain is fuller. It has more volume. The ventricles are not so hugely robust, whereas the 23-week baby's brain has a lot less volume. The gyri are loosely floating in there. The ventricular system is quite large. The cerebellum would be underdeveloped. So at the core of this dysmaturation is this idea that the gray matter architecture is distorted. The white matter connectivity is altered. The cerebellum is underdeveloped. That's supposed to proliferate in the third trimester, and it really, because of the stressors in the ICU, it does not. And then the sensory system is disorganized. This has been referred to as dysmaturation by my colleagues here, Stephen Miller and individuals like that, and Stephen Back in Oregon, or secondary cortical dysplasia is what it has been referred to by Glenn Alward, and I think all of them are hitting on the same thing, that the way the brain develops in the absence of any overt injury can be distorted. At the same time, we have this synaptogenesis happening in the NICU experience. We have a brain that is so turned on and so ready to learn. And so that's great when the baby's in utero and then the baby has a nice term delivery and mommy's right there. But in the environment of the NICU, when you have that brain so ready to turn on, it can have very negative effects. And so this idea that the brain is primed at a global level to receive input, this experience expectant development, means that the brain can be affected at a really significant and pretty broad level with negative input. As children get older, the development of the brain and the genes are triggered to be experience dependent, so they require feedback and experiences to turn on certain things. So in the ICU, you've got a brain that's highly primed to receive any message and turn it into something significant. That's one problem. Then as the children mature and get ready to go home, you have a brain that needs nurturing in order to turn on. That may or may not happen. So you can have similar experiences and you can have very different effects depending on how the brain is nurtured and how the brain is affected by its environment. So while we talk about plasticity as being so promising, and I drank that Kool-Aid as a neonatologist, I'd be like, oh, there's this, but we don't know. Babies' brains are so plastic. We see amazing things happen, and it's true. But likewise, the NICU environment can be very negative and can be very damaging to our babies' brains, and that plasticity is the same etiology. So we need to be more thoughtful and mindful when we're in the ICU of how we treat these babies' brains. So on top of that, there's the organic effect. As a developmental pediatrician, I can tell you that my colleagues cringe when they walk into the ICU because for them, it's such a bombardment of chaos and noises and sounds, and all they see is what that must do to the parent and the child, something we don't pay as much attention to as neonatologists. But when parents are stressed, and we know there's a whole host of literature that says that parents are stressed out of their minds in the ICU, and they're now estimating to be 30 to 40% of our parents are leaving with significant postpartum depression, mood and anxiety disorder that's been exacerbated, or post-traumatic stress. And while we know that's there, it also has a huge impact on attachment. So it's awfully hard to attach to your child if you are so afraid of your child that you can't be in the room. And we have this with one of our moms here right now. She is always looking to get out of the room, avoid it, not touch the baby because she's terrified. It's awfully hard as a parent to feel that you have the capacity to take care of your child when it takes a team of 20 people who come around on rounds to do it. Goodness of fit can be disturbed. So goodness of fit describes the way the seamless and the very not thoughtful dance that goes into parent and children's interactions. And this would be that you just know what your child's going to do because you inherently understand them. You know what they're going to need, how to anticipate their needs, and you do it without even really thinking. But when your child, even though your child might have been temperamentally geared to be just like you, but then your child is put into the ICU for several months, and your child comes out with different regulatory needs and a difficulty regulating themselves, that goodness of fit, your ability to just intuitively know what your child needs, can be very disturbed and very frustrating and hard. And despite your best efforts, it might be very hard to anticipate what your child's reactions are going to be. And then there's this idea of vulnerable child syndrome. We had one family that drove on a toll highway every night to the tune of a $700 a month bill so that his children, they were twins, wouldn't cry when he was putting them to sleep. So this idea that your children have almost died in front of you, they've been so fragile, so weak, that makes it very hard to parent. Anyone who is a parent knows that parenting is a contact sport. You have to be willing to fall, you have to be willing to pull yourself up, you have to tolerate your child's distress in order to teach and to move them forward. But when you're terrified of making them cry, it sets up for a very altered parenting dynamic. So we've talked a bit about the behavioral phenotype of prematurity and its neurologic underpinnings, and we've talked about the impact of the NICU on parents. And then these children go home. And both the Canadian Pediatric Society and the American Academy recommend that these children have a multidisciplinary clinic to provide follow-up after discharge. Neither of them specifies exactly what, where, how, or for how long. And in addition, academic training programs, both the American Board of Pediatrics and in Canada with the Royal College, they do mandate that there's some training and follow-up, but they haven't really emphasized what, how long, who, and that's concerning because there really isn't any clear guidelines. Next slide, please. And the problem with it, though, is that many of them are structured to be in existence until they're about 2 or 3 years old. So 70 to 80% of all follow-ups in both the U.S. and Canada follow children until the ages of around 3. And that has been a very traditional and successful model. But this is from Gahan Roberts' group out of Australia, and it's getting to be a bit old now, but the data is still really compelling. He looked at what you need to be school ready. So you need to be healthy, you need to have physical development. Can you move like your peers? You need social emotional skills. You need to be able to tackle your cognitive abilities to tackle learning. You need to be able to communicate, and you need to have the general ability to learn. And when he compared very preterm children to control classmates, what he found was that at almost every single level, the very preterm child was operating at a deficit compared to his term colleague. So while the preterm child, many of these scores are, I would tell you, are in the average range, usually which is 85 to 115, and you can look and see that almost every number is around that, but most of them are operating at a 10-point deficit. And when you combine that it's not one place that they're operating at a 10-point deficit, but it's multiple, the analogy we use in our clinic here is it's a bit like these children are driving in a snowstorm without any snow tires. So they're going to get through the day, but they're going to swerve all over the road. They're probably going to dent a few cars as they go. It's not going to be pretty. And when they go home, they're going to be exhausted because their tires will have spun exponentially more than their colleagues in class will. The problem is that all of this stuff is surfacing after follow-up has ended. So this is all coming up when these children are in school. Follow-up's long gone. Further to that, and this is similar to the data we have in Ontario, but this was from Dieter Volke's papers, and he looked at what do teachers know? So we know these kids can have trouble in school, and we've always thought the teachers will just know it. They know how to handle it. And so he interviewed them, and what he found was that their knowledge of the common things like cerebral palsy and that there's a gradient in outcome, yeah, those things were fairly strong. But when we got into the minor morbidities, hyperactivity, reading challenges, short-term memory, internalizing behavior, social skills, inattentiveness, delays, math, all of that stuff, their awareness of the preterm having a greater possibility of these challenges was very low. So we know these children are starting to blossom into having problems in the school setting, and we know that neonatal follow-up is gone, the people who know them probably best and know the evidence best. And then here's the kicker, the teachers don't know anything about it. On top of that, it's not just academic. This is from Leanne Woodward out of Australia as well, and what it looked at was peer relationships. So how are kids at making friends? And what they found was that the extremely preterm had more peer difficulties, more likely to report no close friends, and greater dissatisfaction with peers, and spent less time face-to-face interacting with them. Like that boy Alec in the documentary, bullying was a factor. So it really makes you kind of stop and think. And we have incredible neonatal care, we have incredible early follow-up, and then there's no follow-through. So several years ago, I used to do this lecture, and I felt, oh, God, there's nothing we can do. This is horrible. And then I was like, but wait a minute. I am a developmental pediatrician. I do remember I was taught some stuff. And the idea that this event, that this brain development is through dysmaturation, automatically infers that it is modifiable. So it isn't a permanent injury. It isn't, more often than not, it isn't a part of the brain that has liquefied and there's a poor encephaly. So if that is the case, then maybe we need to stop thinking about nature versus nurture and start thinking about nature through nurture. How do we change what we nurture these kids with to change the underlying neurologic underpinnings of their development? So this graph on the right is from James Heckman, and what it, this is what I use when I'm advocating for more money from my colleagues in the hospital. And what it looks at is where's the best return on your dollar. And what you can see is that the earlier we get in there and we make changes, the more likely that they're going to get a good bang for their buck, and we're going to use their money most effectively. So how does this translate? This is all great, but then I was left with, what do I do with follow-up? How do I move this forward? How do I start to push us to follow through? Because while we had a program that I thought was great, we followed kids until school. We were looking at how they held their pencil. We were doing all of these assessments, but what I felt like we weren't doing is we weren't actually looking at were they fitting in, were they actually successful at school. So at Sunnybrook, what we went back to is something that is very commonly discussed now in neonatal follow-up, in developmental peds, and that's the F words. We love being racy. So the F words in developmental disability are future, function, how can we help your child still be active, fun, isn't that everything right there, family, friends, and fitness. And we took these as our guiding words for how we wanted to restructure our clinic, because ultimately that's what any kid cares about. They don't care about necessarily how they hold their pencil. So we've translated this into our own mission, and we have really rewritten it. We believe in these outcomes, and this took like a day of people sitting around searching their souls. We believe that there's hope for a bright future. We believe in empowered parents, and we think when we empower parents, we can help them navigate this world, recognizing that nobody's going to know their child better than them. And we believe that our kids are extraordinary, and we have to push them to be happy and thriving and not give up and not walk away. So how are we moving this forward? We're looking at outcomes that actually affect function and fun. And while we're still maintaining our commitment to measuring traditional outcomes like the 18-month Bailey, because I think that's an important quality measure, we are otherwise revamping our schedule of follow-up and focusing on these issues much more prevalently. And the first step of that is we've started a program where we're actually going into the ICU, and we're taking on some of the more chronic babies and putting them on our follow-up service, and we call it BOOST, Building Opportunities for Optimal and Smooth Transitions. And we're breaking a lot of rules. This mom, I got in big trouble for her. She had been in the hospital for upwards of 5 months. This is a classic story. We all know it. Baby weighed 385 grams. And spring and summer were here, and the mom was kind of pasty green. We have no windows in our ICU for the parents. Mom was in the room every day, all night, never leaving. And all she wanted to do was take her baby for a walk. And we were like a month from discharge, and the nurses were like, no, you can't take your baby outside. And I was like, well, why not? She's going to leave the hospital soon. This baby is starting to get bigger. So after a lot of pushing and gentle cajoling, we agreed that she could go outside with a nurse. And so initially we thought she was just like going outside like right near the hospital. She was like a kilometer away. And I laughed. I was like, that's awesome. She slowly had to stretch her cord and push herself to be safe and feel comfortable. This mother is one of the most empowered mothers, and she really feels like she knows what's going on with her baby. On top of that, through the Child Bright Network, we are collaborating on a grant where we're looking at a type of stress reduction for parents. So we have medical navigation for them if they're randomized to this arm. In addition to that, however, they also are getting a form of mindfulness that we've been very interested in here as part of their NICU stay and after, should they so want it. So it's a little bit of a different approach, and it's proving itself to be not only feasible but quite successful. Our other mission is that we really wanted to empower parents, and we wanted to make sure that they knew what they were doing. And so we decided we really wanted, through Boost, we were teaching, and then we wanted to provide parents with more opportunities to learn more about their children. So we developed a calendar, and so this is available to any parent in our clinic, and we offer many of our workshops at least 3 times a year, starting with Triple P, which is a positive parenting program. It's very common in Canada. There's great evidence behind it. It's actually out of Australia, I believe, or New Zealand. I think it's Australia. And we chose it because It's a very positive way to teach parents how to parent. And the way I talk to parents about coming to Triple P is they'll say some people who go to Triple P don't have a clue about parenting. They might be a first-time mom, they might be 17. For our parents, you might be a third-time mom, but now we've given you a Ferrari, and we know you know how to drive, but we've taken the brakes off. And so coming to Triple P teaches you how to drive a Ferrari. So we try to encourage parents to come, that their child is going to be different, and they're going to need to learn special skills to handle them. As our children progress in age, we start to look at some handwriting workshops. So instead of dedicating one-on-one time to how children hold their pencils, we've decided to make it a group because I don't want that to be the only focus of our program. Transitioning to school, educating parents about what to expect. Sleep and feeding, that's been one of our popular ones. We may have to add more sessions. Toilet training, again, very popular. The Little Explorers is just starting now. We were a little slow to launch it, but it's been very popular. And that's our very busy toddlers, and how do you start to put the constraints on what's safe exploration, how do we start to regulate them, not have them running around all the time. And then our worry workshop has been a huge hit. And that is geared right now to 5 to 8-year-olds, but we've had such a request, we may make 2 sessions, so a 5 to 8 and then an 8 to 11. And that is teaching children, just giving them some tools in their toolbox to handle their anxiety. It's not counseling and it's not psychotherapy. It's, you got this worry. How are we going to handle that? Is it going to be in your face every day, or are we going to be able to put it aside? And we also realized that our catchment, Ontario is large, and right now it's mainly snow-covered. We needed to find a way to reach out to families that couldn't come down and participate in all of these things. So one of the goals is we had to become much more electronically present, and that took a huge amount of time and energy for us to navigate through the hospital administration because there's all these privacy issues, blah, blah, blah. But we were able to get a follow-up site where most of our workshops are going to be eventually put up onto web videos, so parents, even if they can't come, they can get the content. In addition to that, we launched a Facebook page, which took a huge amount of energy. It's a closed page, and it's only for our families, but it lets us discuss opportunities, workshops, articles, and again, engage them. So we have a 3-year thing that goes out electronically to families for what to expect. We do talk about screen time, and specifically the screen time I would recommend. I think Fred Rogers was incredible at teaching people how to be good neighbors. Ultimately, that's the same thing as how do you deal with your peers. So all of this is embedded into the Facebook and into the website. So as we translate this into the children, and we are continuing to look at it, we want to make sure we're building opportunities for them to have all of the things that they need. And so one of the things we did is we looked at our staffing, and we decided if we were going to focus on social success, we really needed to look at behavior. And so we've hired a behavioral analyst who is helping to guide us with evidence-based strategies for behavior management. We're looking at approaches to examining function and behavior and looking at contextualizing what's driving it. And like I said, we have all the workshops that we've talked about already. We've also aggressively recognized that mental health isn't something we can continue to pretend doesn't exist. So that's Kate. She's actually one of our paid parents. Kate is now, she has a master's in education and is just tremendous. And Kate has been hired by the hospital to examine all of Ontario for what's out there for mental health. What do we have? What do we need? And what's working? And so Kate's working with our families, those are her 2 daughters, in our program as well as in Ontario at large to find out what worked for them, what didn't work, and then we're going to develop a dashboard so we have a better sense of what's out there for mental health. There's a lot of stuff, and it's the same in the U.S. It's starting to become available, but often we don't know what it takes to get into it, what the criteria are, and how to get in touch with it. So that's what we're trying to create a whole dashboard for. So in conclusion, the behavioral phenotype of prematurity is associated with a chance for increased difficulty functionally. I think the biggest issue is that there are huge gaps in the resources, but that the resources do exist. And I would argue that we really need radical changes in follow-up in order for it to be true follow-up and not just lip speak. And then that's my team. I have an incredible team. The parents are incredibly active and vocal, and everybody has access to all of our emails. I will say that parents, the emails are all up front. They email us as they need to. I find it's a very nimble way to communicate with families. And I'm lucky. I have an incredible team that has taught me a ton about all of this and has provided a lot of guidance. So we're very lucky. And then that's my email, and that's my little monkey on the left. And any questions?
Preventative measures. What are preventative measures we can do in the NICU to help decrease minor morbidities?
Felix, drop the audio for a sec.
So the question was, what are the things we can do in the NICU to modify or minimize the effects of the minor morbidities? I think that's a really powerful question, and I think there are huge things we can do. One of the most important things we can do is encourage parents to be present. So we have to be, everybody has the parent that annoys the crap out of them, I get it, but we have to encourage them to be present. Kangaroo care, anyone who knows me in Ontario, I am like obnoxious about it. Every day on rounds, is mother holding this baby? How long? The kangaroo-a-thon, if anyone wants to be competitive, it's in May. That, kangarooing in all seriousness, offers an opportunity to change the sensory development. It offers the opportunity to improve attachment. It offers medical benefits such as transferring of the microbiomes, protective bacteria, better sleep for the baby. Better sleep means better learning. There's so many things. So kangaroo care is an absolute, and I really think the days of we don't do it for this gestation, we don't do it if they're on this ventilator, that's all crap. We need to develop multiple nursing teams to help with transfers so that we can do it safely. I think educating parents about their babies and really changing the discussion. Neonatology is very disease-oriented. It's respiratory distress syndrome. Show me a 24-weeker who can breathe on their own for any prolonged period of time, and I would say that I don't trust them. It's immaturity. It's not a disease. So I think also stopping the way we converse about these babies as being so disease-ridden, and instead just pointing out that this is normal. It's normal behavior for a 24-weeker to need positive pressure. It's what we expect. Don't be frightened. This is normal. And trying to get a sense of recalibration. So when I do a consult with moms, and when you guys meet your moms when they come to the bedside, the thing I feel is most important for them to learn is the one question I want them to learn to ask, is my baby doing what you would expect for their gestation? If the answer is yes, then hopefully it can help them relax and recognize that they're okay. If the answer is no, then they need to ask why not. But more often than not, the answer is yeah, your baby is doing it. It's a lot of discussion about TPN and ventilator settings and antibiotics, but this is normal for a 24-weeker. So you're okay. And just trying to de-escalate the anxiety. So the question was, do we offer any mental health resources for parents? It's one of the things I'm most aggressively chasing money for, is I would like to have more mental health support in the ICU. I've come up with some strategic ways to bypass needing programmatic money, though, and I think that has potential. For example, in the U.S. and in Canada, for some models, billing is fee-for-service. So you see a person, you do a service, and you get paid. It's like fishing in a stocked pond in our NICU. So my point to them was, instead of trying to use program money to bring in a specialist in mental health, why don't we encourage psychiatry to come? They could make a lot of money in a very short period of time with their bills. So I think thinking of creative ways to get more mental health support is a big one. I don't think every mother needs psychiatry and every mother doesn't want or need medication. On top of that, looking at this mindfulness with the Child Bright Network has been really powerful. Families have said that it has made a huge difference. And the type of mindfulness we have pursued is similar to that which has good evidence for autism, and that's why I chose that one, because we know that parents of children with autism live through real and unrelenting chronic stress in a way similar to these families, and so it seems like the best model to chase. And we're finding that it's feasible. It's definitely hard. It takes a lot of time, and I think that's where we're still struggling with how to roll it out, but it's proving itself to be helpful.
Okay.
So those are our beginnings of taking a stab at this. The other thing we're doing is, at my request, parents are getting regularly screened with Edinburghs, and we are making sure we have our finger on the pulse of their mental health and not just speculating. And I think Boost has made a huge difference. Getting families to have one consistent provider as they transition to home for the last month or 2 months of their hospitalization when they're not critically ill. That consistency of care, putting more and more responsibility on the parents, letting them go for longer walks with their children and not policing them. We had one mother who's, I don't want any additives in my breast milk. I think there's a problem with it. We let her do it. If you don't, she's going to do it at home. But it gave her a sense of empowerment. It gave her a sense that she was in control. She ended up putting the additives back in herself within a week of discharge, but she left feeling like she was the one who was in charge, and that's what we really want. So I think those are the beginnings of making a difference towards mental health.
Thank you so much, Steve.
I really wish I was there. Sorry, I'm not.
We wish you were here too.
Take care.
So we've got to the end of our last presentation in this series on pain, stress, and the neonatal brain. I really hope that this will help you to see the connection between the little things we do every day in the NICU that might have an impact on the way a baby's brain matures and develops, and even the relationships between them and their parents, how important and critical that is. Dr. Church gave us so many great facts and passion and heartfelt suggestions about the things she's doing in her units, as well as what we can look forward to in the future as some research is finished. So I hope that you've enjoyed this total presentation from beginning to end this month on pain, stress, and the neonatal brain. If you've missed any of them, scan the QR code on this page or click the link in the show notes below to go to our October resource page. This is where you will get access to all the slides, all the replays in one place, as well as some additional references and articles that I think you'll find interesting, and some other exclusive content that we didn't put out on our YouTube channel. So do me a favor, if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button, and this way YouTube will know that you like content like this from us, and they'll also know to send you more content like this from other educators here on YouTube. Without your support, we couldn't continue to do free content like this that helps NICU professionals all over the world care for babies better. So I hope that you've enjoyed this presentation. This is Kathy. I look forward to seeing you next time right here on our